This is a little video about a prospective Year 10 interdisciplinary unit entitled Writing Choose Your Own Pathway Stories. It's based on the pick your own adventure type books, but it relates closely to how game makers go about structuring games for our entertainment. So I'm going to look at an interview with Ron Gilbert about that very matter.
In San Francisco for the Game Developers Conference early this year, I got a chance to sit down with one of my favorite developers, Ron Gilbert, who created games like Monkey Island and The Cave, so I thought now would be a perfect time to share that experience with you.
Share away.
If you don't know who Ron Gilbert is, you really should. One of his first games for LucasArts in the late 80s was Maniac Mansion, a game that kicked off a golden era of amazing point-and-click adventures. Say, are you guys pirates? After dabbling in edutainment,
You made it!
and clickers like Death Spank and The Cave, I'm rescued.
Rescued!
Shut up. Ron Gilbert is ready to return to the 2D adventure game scene with his retro-flavored Thimbleweed Park. And I'm ready to ask him all about it. Ron, thank you for joining me. For people who don't know, can you just give me the pitch for Thimbleweed Park?
Well, Thimbleweed Park is an adventure game. It's very reminiscent of the classic point-and-click adventure games, but with a lot of very kind of modern approach to it and modern look to it. And it's the story of these two detectives.
I introduce myself as Special Agent Gray.
There's this body that's found on this bridge outside Thimbleweed Park, and these two detectives show up to investigate what's going on with the body. But really the body is just like the tip of the iceberg. Right? There's this whole weird, bizarre story going on with this town of strange people. And as you start to investigate the body, you slowly uncover the weirdness that is Thimbleweed Park.
The pursuit of our dreams turn to nightmares.
It's like a MacGuffin body.
Very much so, yeah.
Why do you think that adventure games have sort of had a bit of a comeback?
I think that has a lot to do with the broadening of our market. That we went through this phase of being this very niche, this very kind of hardcore gaming niche audience, and I think a lot of it has to do with the explosion of mobile games because they've introduced a very broad group of people to gaming. And those people are playing, they're just playing things like Candy Crush and whatnot, but they've kind of experienced maybe games for the first time, and things like story games, which adventure games are, the Telltale stuff, or things like Firewatch, etc. They're story games, and people like stories, right? We watch movies, we watch television, we love stories, we love characters, and adventure games really embody all of that. And as the audience is kind of growing, that's the stuff that they're used to playing and used to enjoying.
When you did Maniac Mansion and then again with The Cave, you've used that mechanic of multiple characters, and to get multiple endings you play through several times. What is it about that as a storytelling device that you really enjoy, because you've used it here again with Thimbleweed?
When you're telling a story, I like stories that are multifaceted. I like stories that there are lots of different stories going on. And one of the great ways to do that in a game is just to have multiple characters, right? So in Thimbleweed Park, you have the two detectives. They each have their own story about why they're there, why they're investigating this body.
I arrived just as the sun began to slide into the slumber of a dark night.
Plus Dolores and Franklin and Ransom, they all have their own stories that they're dealing with, plus there's the main story of the game. And I find, as a storyteller, I find it interesting because I can kind of tell 6 stories now, right? I can tell the main story, and I can tell all these character stories, and it's nice because you can explore the stories as a player based on how they interest you. If you're not really interested in Ransom's story, you don't really explore it very much, and that's okay to do, and I like that aspect. So I think that's why I tended to gravitate towards multiple playable characters.
And so then making this game through a Kickstarter, what's been the experience like of having the public kind of watching you all the time as you go? Because I feel like it's way more pressure this time.
It is. It's a lot of pressure. I've worked in situations where I've had publishers, which are looking over you, but I think it's a lot more stressful with, you have 20,000 Kickstarter backers looking over you, and I think it keeps you honest in a way, because that people are looking at what you're doing, and it forces you to be kind of upfront, and it forces you to really talk about what you're doing. Not only do we have more final art from Mark, but we also have the almost 3,000 book titles that were submitted by backers and readers for the bookstore. So there's such a long history of Kickstarter projects going off the rails, and the first sign of a Kickstarter project being in trouble is they stop doing updates, right? Because things are going wrong, and it's like, oh my God, we don't know what to do. So I've been very conscious about always keeping people up to date on what's happening, and if anything is starting to go wrong, I want to immediately talk about it.
Screen scrolls, there's all the parallaxing going on. There's another light here the character moves in and out of, and another light there.
And part of it is keeping the backers informed, because they put up hard money to help make this game. The other part is, I think it's just educational. It's educational to see how games are made and the weird decisions that we have to go through making games. So I'm just trying to be very transparent about all that.
Is this the kind of connection that you would have wanted to have with your audience when you were making games in the 90s, or is this something that you kind of needed to go through this long career where you felt comfortable enough to start sharing?
Yeah, you really do need to feel comfortable with that, because you are, you're dancing naked in a way, and you need to feel comfortable with showing people your bad decisions, showing people your mistakes, and I think that takes a certain amount of experience to be able to do that.
I'll probably do some stuff later on where the direction they're facing is a little more important, so I might not select the post office boxes in the back.
And I've just, I know that screwing up is so much a part of our process, right? That it's necessary, and it's just talking about that a little bit more.
How has making these games changed since the 90s? Is it just technically, or is your sort of approach to video games changed?
Yeah, there's a lot of technology stuff, and we have much better tools these days. Things like Photoshop, right, are an amazing tool. We didn't have stuff like that back then. Hardware, the machines are much faster. They have, virtually unlimited amount of memory compared to what we had back then. But from a design standpoint, you also approach it differently. You approach pacing a little bit differently. You approach puzzle design a little bit differently.
Do you find that that's harder to do than when you were doing Monkey Island or something, because there also needs to be enough content here for the game, whereas content in older games also included that hour in which you just did not know what was going on.
Right, yeah.
You were just figuring it out.
Right.
Would you happen to have a file? You think I'd be in here if I did? All I have is this carrot cake my Aunt Tilly made.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, it is a lot harder, because you could just go, you know what, this is a hard puzzle, who cares?
Hey, you can't come back here.
People love it, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to buy the hint book, win-win, right?
That should hold for a while.
But now we spend a lot more time looking at stuff. We spend a lot more time playtesting. When people played an adventure game, back in the 80s and 90s, they wanted to be stuck. They wanted to be banging their head against the computer screen, and we tried to service that in a lot of ways. And now I don't think that's the case. I think the gaming audience is actually older. The gaming audience has kids, and they have families, and gaming is one of the kind of pillars of entertainment you do now, right? You watch TV, you go to movies, you do other things, and so we can't suck up all of your time 8 hours a day doing the gaming stuff. So I think the games have to be a little more accessible, and they don't have to be easy, right? They can still be challenging, but I think they have to be fair, and they have to be clear about what it is that you're doing.
Can we talk about a cave for a second?
Sure.
Because I loved the cave.
Oh,
I thought it was fantastic. And do you feel like that game gave you the confidence that Thimbleweed would be something that would go purely backed by the public?
I think the thing about making that game, as I went through and designed the game, I just realized how much I love making adventure games. I love creating stories and puzzles and just weaving them all together. And I think that's making the cave really, I think, kind of sparked my interest in really getting back and doing, more of a traditional adventure game.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
So clearly, game design is an interdisciplinary activity. We're going to simplify that a little bit. We're going to have a look at developing a story that has multiple pathways through it. And the key concept that we're looking at is form. For our planning purposes, that will be our key concept. From principles into practice document, form is described as the shape and underlying structure of an entity or piece of work, including its organization, essential nature and external appearance, and from the maths guide, it refers to the understanding that the underlying structure and shape of an entity is distinguished by its properties. Form provides opportunities for students to appreciate the aesthetic nature of the constructs used in a discipline, and we're certainly going to build on that. So the related concepts come from both the language and literature guide and from the mathematics guide. We're going to be using English and maths as our two disciplines for this unit. So structure requires essential understandings about plot, narrative, discourse, form, transformation, thesis, argument, syntax, foreshadowing, and flashbacks. So we expect to see some evidence of that discipline when we look at disciplinary grounding. In maths, we're looking at representation and systems. The global context, which is going to frame our inquiry and going to frame the assessment itself, is personal and cultural expression, and we're going to explore what is the nature and purpose of creative expression. Our statement of inquiry for this unit will be, through the creative and purposeful process of creating a choose-your-own-pathway story, we will gain an appreciation of form. We will explore the story's structure and how it both informs and is informed by its underlying systematic representation. So through English inquiry, we're going to be looking at genre, what sort of genre lend themselves to that type of story, the plot devices that one might use, the typical moments in a plot that lend themselves to multiple pathways, and what narrative voice and narrative point of view will best serve the story. In maths inquiry, will be centered around directed networks, doing some definitions about certain aspects of that particular branch of mathematics, looking at single source, multiple sync directed networks, looking at which structures might be interesting, thinking about what the narrative structure of a game like Thimbleweed Park might look like as a network diagram. Certainly we won't go into that in depth because that would be quite complex, and looking at options for game developers or even story writers when they're looking at developing this, which sort of structure serves them best. Tree diagram structure, an ordinary directed network structure that might be centered in the middle, or an adjacency matrix even, rather than a diagram itself. Here's two examples of what I'm talking about. So on the left we have a tree structure directed network, and we can easily see where the ends of stories are, and we have a little bit of detail of what that might be. And on the right hand side we have a very centered directed network diagram with the ends of the stories out on the perimeter of that diagram. We obviously won't be asking the students to do anything as complex as that. We're going to keep it quite simple. So here we've got some examples of some small directed networks, two of which really don't lend themselves to a story. Only graph 1 really does that because it has a source and sync nodes in it. And we'll be asking the students to develop a story that has certain specifications for a diagram and linking that diagram to the story itself. As far as assessment goes, for disciplinary grounding, for English we'll be looking at those genre-specific structure elements. For mathematics we'll be looking at the structure of the story in terms of a representation through a directed network. And for the interdisciplinary stuff, we're really asking the students to use both the elements of story and the genre that they choose to inform how the story might proceed, and then communicating that structure in terms of a network diagram, and vice versa, actually choosing some elements from a structured diagram and letting that inform the flow of the story. Communicating, students will be providing evidence from many parts of the whole process, including the process statement, the final reflection, the actual planning that they do in the final product. And reflecting, we're really wanting the students to use their interdisciplinary learning through this to make some sort of statement about their understanding of form